Good morning. My Portuguese is not very good. So I thank you ahead of time for your patience in listening to somebody in a different language. And plus, I am originally from India, so I also have an Indian accent, and I tend to talk very fast. So I want to tell the translators I'm going to try to be slow, but please feel free to just simply like wave at me or something if I go too fast, okay? Your work is important, and it requires a lot of patience. So I want to thank you as well. And then in addition to Alini here, who is like this, she's just like a dynamo, right? It's impossible to say no to her, ever. So, I'm just happy to be doing whatever Alini wants this week. That's my plan. But before I begin, I also want to acknowledge Professor Rose here from Sao Paulo and Isabella. And I think Isabella is the power behind the power, right? In some ways. And the reason I mention these two ladies is the four of us, in some ways, have been in conversation throughout the pandemic. In a strange way, the positive side effect of the pandemic is we all had time and we were all able to connect remotely. So it's wonderful to have, it's not just me, there are 3 other people here who can talk to you about effectuation, teach you, they're involved in it, they think about it. And in people like Alina's case, they have actually practiced it as well, right? So just want to acknowledge everybody and thank everybody. I am going to do a short introduction to the research and the theory, but I want to mention that my first identity is as an entrepreneur. So I have co-founded 5 ventures in my life before coming into academia. So when I went to undergraduate college, my dream was to start a company, and I realized that in those days, and even today in some places, you don't really get to learn entrepreneurship, right? The assumption is either that there is nothing worth teaching in entrepreneurship, or it is too, it's all about uncertainty, and it's like mystical and magical, and we cannot teach it, right? So people told me entrepreneurship is like art, so we cannot teach it. And I'm like, we teach art all the time, right? And then they said entrepreneurship is, too many failures, there is nothing there. If enough idiots go out and start companies, some of them will succeed. We don't need a theory. This is what I heard. But having been an entrepreneur, I knew 2 things. I knew that there is a lot of things in entrepreneurship that we can, it's much more systematic, practical, day-to-day things that we can learn, and it is connected with life lessons and lessons of working with people. So I knew there were many more things that can be taught and learned. I also know that not everything can be taught or learned inside a classroom, but that is true for everything, even accounting. Right? So even though there was not much research, with just this confidence from practice, I entered into research. So I'm going to give a very short snapshot of the research and how it has developed, so that when we start talking to the entrepreneurs who will come up here, they can ask questions, but we can also relate to their experiences, so we can bring practice and thought research together. So for those of you who are interested in the practice, it is very interesting if we have a framework to think about your practice. You don't have to learn everything over and over again. You get a deeper understanding of your own experience. And for those of us who are in academia, and we are primarily researchers, it is important to get involved in practice, because otherwise we are just fantasizing somewhere in a bathtub, right? So we need to get really engaged with reality. Einstein said that you should have Einfühlung for your phenomenon, right? Even as a physicist, you have to feel empathically connected to what you're studying. So hopefully our days here will bring together thought and practice with a focus on being rooted in practice and in place, as you mentioned. Okay, with that, I do have a presentation, but I have my entire computer, so we don't have to follow the presentation. We can go wherever you want. So I'll do a short intro. We'll bring the entrepreneurs here, and we'll get into a discussion. And I'm going to invite the audience to also discuss. So we have plenty of time for a lovely conversation. So let me just get started. So, okay, it works. I always say, first rule of technology, assume it does not work, right? Well, it works. So this is for those of you who are interested. When I came into academia, I wanted to understand what is it that entrepreneurs learn, right? If you have been an entrepreneur for 15 years or longer, full-time, so deeply experienced, and you have every possible experience that entrepreneurship offers you, from failure to success, what is it that you have learned that I can also learn, and maybe some of it I can come and teach? So that was the original study. Since then, this research went crazy in some ways. So people around the world started writing case studies, like the cases of the entrepreneurs we will talk to today. But they also started collecting other kinds of data. So there are about 100 journal articles in good journals with research that has been published as well. And even though the original study had a very, very few very experienced entrepreneurs, later on now we have studies from 54 countries. So what we are talking about is truly a framework of thinking about what entrepreneurs actually do on a daily basis, okay? So what is it? What is the key finding from the original study? So I'm going to do it like an entrepreneur, give you the bottom line first, right? And then explain, and we'll go a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. And hopefully with the stories, we can go really deep. So the idea here is entrepreneurs deal with uncertainties. Like yesterday, Alini was saying over lunch, and Professor Bartholo was saying a little bit, we had all these stones. She was saying, we have lemons. It's all lemons. Lemons get thrown at you. And one of the principles I will talk to you about is when life throws lemons at you, learn how to make lemonade, right? So entrepreneurs deal with unexpected things all the time. They deal with deep uncertainties, but also many different kinds of uncertainties. And almost everything we teach in a business school, at least at that time when the research was done, almost everything was about trying to predict the future better. So can we learn techniques to say what will happen in the future, right? Like we are all going to become better at prediction. And those are all very useful. I mean, the tools of prediction that we teach everybody is very useful. It just turned out that the expert entrepreneurs that I studied, they kind of invert the logic, right? They go to the opposite logic, which is, you know, to the extent that we have control, we don't need to predict. Now that seems a paradox, right? To the extent that you can control the future, you cannot predict. Sure, that sounds cool. But then the question is, how do you control a future that you cannot predict, right? That is the paradox part of it. It sounds very interesting, but how do you do that? And again, I'm going to give you the bottom line. So this is the practical bottom line. The practical bottom line is not to try to control everything, right? That's not the point. The point is control itself becomes your strategy. So you are always asking yourself, what is within my control? What is within our control? And with whatever little is available within our control, how can we co-create a future? So the control of the future is not trying to control something that is outside your control, right? It is like saying, work with things within your control, and then you can shape and change and transform not only your own future, but you can actually transform the world in some ways. So that is really the lesson that these expert entrepreneurs are learning. Not only are they learning that, they're learning how to do that. And we will get to that in a minute. So I'm going to give you one more little idea here, and then we will get to the practical part. So the idea is, when you have this view, what you are doing is you're taking prediction and control. Normally, we think about prediction and control is the better you can predict, the more control you have. It is this relationship which is like a straight line, right? The more you can predict, the more you can control. What the expert entrepreneurs did is they separated those two things out. So the moment you separate it, you get you get two different dimensions. Now you get not only two dimensions, now you get a space which you can learn about, right? So it's not prediction versus control. It is all these relationships between prediction and control. So normally, all of us want this, and we think that very successful entrepreneurs are visionaries, right? They are high in prediction and high in control, and they know how to do that. The opposite of that is what most of us actually experience, especially if you're entrepreneurs. Low in prediction, you cannot predict the future and you cannot control it. So you have to be very adaptive. You are quick. You'll try to react to things that happen to you, things like that. So that also is a set of techniques. And then we have the what I call like the business school technique, where you're trying to predict better, but you're also trying to not assume control. So you say, what if things go wrong? You do plan B, plan C, scenario planning, you know, all those kinds of things. But that leaves the bottom right hand. What do you do in that space? And that is the effectual space. So I want you to remember that the entire space is important, and we have to learn all of that. It is just that there was virtually no research 20 years ago in that bottom right. And that is what all of us have been working to build in the last 20 years. That's why it's a little new and exciting and interesting, because it is one area of life, and especially entrepreneurship, where there was virtually no techniques and no strategies. And we have been developing that. OK, now let's go to the practical. How do you do this? How do you actually operate low in prediction, high in control, right? There are 5 principles, and you will see in each of the 5 principles, you are going to do this inversion, right? You're going to do the opposite of what everybody teaches you in entrepreneurship, even in Silicon Valley, by the way. We'll talk about that. Maybe with Finapi, we'll get into that a little bit more. But so here are the 5 principles. The first one is the bird in hand principle. And as you can imagine, it's really thinking about what is within your control. Don't worry about all these things that are outside your control, which means you cannot say, oh, here is my vision. Here, I want to start and achieve this particular goal, right? So the idea here is you don't start with some goal. You are flexible on goals, but you are very strong and realistic and practical on means. What are the means available to me, right? So you are really rooted in things within your control, and you let that means then drive what your goals can be, instead of starting with a goal. Because if you start with a goal, then you immediately think of all the things you don't have. And then now you say, oh, I have to go get money from him. I have to get technology from him. I have to go get marketing from her. And then all of a sudden, you're just chasing resources. But these expert entrepreneurs are saying, don't worry about that. yet. Start with who you are, what you know, and whom you know, and ask yourself, what kinds of ventures can I build? What can I do that somebody else will get some value for, right? So that brings us to the second principle, which is affordable loss. Now again, think about it. Normally, we think of projects in terms of what will be the return on investment. Whether you think about it as money, monetary return, or whether you think about social return, environmental return, but you're always thinking about expected return. But these entrepreneurs are not thinking about expected return, they are thinking about affordable loss. They are asking, what am I willing to lose to do this venture? Even though I don't know how successful that venture will be. Is it so important to me that I will do it anyway? And now we get to today's theme a little bit. A lot of creative people are like that, right? They're not sitting down and thinking, let me make the painting that will sell very well. In fact, if they do that, it actually comes in the way of their creativity in some ways. Instead, but they still have to pay the bills. So they ask, how much time can I spend on the love of my life, on my passion? How can I make what I want to do pay, right? So it's a reverse way of thinking about things like funding and return. And we can have, hopefully we will have discussions about some of these things. So this is day one, you can do this. And day two, what do? You start talking to other people. And when you're talking to other people, you are not only gathering information, because remember, your goal may not be that clear. What you are going to make, the return may not be clear. So how do you talk to people? And that is why the crazy quilt. The crazy quilt is you talk to anybody and everybody, and some people, for some reason of their own, will get excited. So the crazy quilt is you are willing and open to work with anybody who wants to work with you. So you are not targeting and pitching. You can do that also. But you can talk to anybody. And it does not matter if they don't have all the money in the world, because everyone will have some resources that they can contribute. So what you're looking for in the crazy quilt is you're looking for partners. You're not worrying about competition. You're not worrying about return. You're saying, how can I build partners? So like in your case, when you put this together, you might have to now go to 4 partners, and each of them wants a different thing. So we end up doing 4 different meetings, right, in Rio in December. And the idea is, let's partner. And then depending on what different partners want, that kind of decides the kind of venture you end up building. And I mentioned the lemons and the lemonade already. So in this process, there are always things that are outside your control that are going to hit you. And many of them may be negative. Some of them may be positive as well. So learn to make, lemonade with lemons. So instead of trying to avoid and dodge the lemons, collect them. Even the stones, make sure you duck so you don't get hurt, but collect the stones and maybe you can build something. And that brings us to the final principle, which is this. This is a very profound idea, right? This is the idea that the future is not out there. It's not something there. It's not a mountain that we are trying to reach and climb. The future is like is a piece of clay, right? And we are all sculptors. And the future can be co-created. It can be shaped. It can be transformed. It comes from what you and I choose to do. Every one of us is a pilot of our own plane, and yet we have to fly together. And that is one of the interesting things about the pilot and the plane. It says the future does not run on autopilot, right? It is something that you and I have to build together, work together, maintain together, and shape together, okay? So these are the 5 principles. I'm going to do one more slide, just show you how the principles go over time. And then I will show you a small video from an entrepreneur. So you don't have to continue to listen to me. How are we doing on time? How much, have I gone over half an hour? Yeah, because I want the most time to be given to the entrepreneurs and not me talking here. Okay, so we're going to look at the same principles, but we are going to look at them as a process, okay? So here we go. So you start with who you are, who am I, what do I know, whom do I know? And it may be one or two co-founders, it can be individual, doesn't matter. And then you ask yourself, given who I am, what I know, and whom I know, what kind of things can I create for affordable loss? So you also get to decide what your affordable loss is. So you get to control the downside of your venture. What are you willing to lose? Right? So given those constraints, you come up with some things that you can do. So I tell my students, this is day one, right? This is not a long process. This is day one. Day two, you start talking to other people. You start interacting with people. And when you interact with other people, what are you trying to do? You're trying to get them to co-create with you, right? So you are not looking only for information and advice for your venture. You're actually working with them to think about how they can be part of your venture. And you're allowing them to talk, and you become a good listener, and you actually start getting commitments. And only the advice that comes with commitments you pay attention to. The other advice is not that important. Otherwise, what happens is you get all kinds of advice, people telling you all kinds of things. You should do this, you should not do that. Here's 4 other things you can do. Oh, did you know that? So information can be overwhelming for entrepreneurs. So these expert entrepreneurs say, the moment somebody gives you information, ask them, what are you willing to actually commit? Right? Give me some skin in the game, they call it in the US, right? So any information that comes with skin in the game, that's what you act upon, right? So you gather commitments. What happens when you gather commitments? So every time you get a commitment, you get some new means. Doesn't matter, doesn't have to be multi-billionaire Bill Gates. It can just be my friend here. And he says, well, you know what, I cannot really leave my job to come work for you, but I am willing to work, you know, maybe next 6 months of Saturdays. Whatever he can afford to lose, right? It's a small set of means, but he is actually committed. So now what happens is our means are increasing, even though they may be increasing in a small way, but it becomes who we are. What we know, right? It's no longer the entrepreneur alone. You already have a co-creator. And you have to figure out the relationship, but the idea is very quickly, this process is not an individual process. It becomes a process of partnering with people, right? But on the other hand, you will also get some new goals, because he may not be excited about my idea of my venture, but he may be excited about his idea of my venture. So we have to think about what we are going to do together differently as well, every time somebody puts some skin in the game. So you get these new goals, and that sets up some constraints on what you can and cannot do. So this becomes about what we can afford to lose in some ways. And then this process, this double cycle, keeps on going for a while. What happens when lemons hit us? So the same thing, right? That will hit the bird in hand, it will hit the affordable loss, it will change it. So that's okay when lemons happen. But the process itself, over time, leads not only to new ventures, it very often leads to new futures altogether. Markets that nobody thought existed can come into being through this process. And we have lots of case studies showing that that can happen. So now the last little bit, all said and done, you're all interested in practice. And whether you're interested in practice or academia, people always ask, does this mean that if I build a venture effectually, I'm going to be more successful? You talked about success and failure, so they always want to know, will this make me more successful? And I always tell them, it is not about the probability of success. This is a much more interesting framework. What it does is, in this process, you can succeed or you can fail. But here is the interesting part. When you succeed, if you succeed, your success is likely to be much more innovative than if you built it using the traditional causal model of building the venture. Why? You can see throughout the process. Every time somebody comes, some changes are possible. Every once in a while, we don't have enough of the ingredients. So we have to be creative. Necessity is the mother of invention, right? So both the idea that we may not have enough resources, but the fact that all kinds of people are coming in through the crazy quilt makes the outcome much more likely to be innovative. Similarly, what happens when failure happens? When failure happens, your failures are likely to be much smaller because nobody is investing more than they can afford to lose, which means we can all build more than one venture. So the probability of success increases only if you're willing to fail sometimes, like you mentioned, right? If you're willing to take your failures and put them up as trophies and wake up the next day and do again. So over time, this process allows you to make many more tries because you have not lost anything more than you can afford to lose. But everybody with you, each person has not lost more than they can afford to lose. So that is why the performance implications of this framework are very interesting. Now, as an entrepreneur, I knew how to do effectuation, right? And I had learned the hard way how to do it. But until I did the research and sat down and worked out the theory, I did not understand. I myself, even though I've started 5 ventures, I myself did not understand how important it is to think about the picture, the framework, the theory, the logic. Right? So even for practical entrepreneurs, I think the model is very interesting because first, it comes from practical experience. This is not, I did not sit in a bathtub and dream this theory. It came from the actual entrepreneurs that we studied. And the second thing is, by spending the time to take all these people's experiences and think about how that relates to the future, you're able to understand why certain ways of doing things have certain benefits and certain disadvantages, but also it shows you that entire space of prediction and control and how you can build many different kinds of companies with different chances of success and failure as well. So that's why I am now a big fan of research as well. I love theorizing, but I also really like it to be rooted in practice. So in the spirit of rooting it in practice, since today's theme is kind of creative entrepreneurs, I'm going to show you a video. I think it's 3 or 4 minutes long. And this is a video from Damon John, who is the founder of FUBU. He is also a shark on Shark Tank. If people here like to watch Shark Tank, I do not know. But he started in the hip-hop industry, and he built this really enormously successful venture. And Damon John is being interviewed by a journalist from Inc. magazine. And the reason I find this video clip very interesting is it tells Damon John's story. That is fascinating by itself. But it also shows you the difference between causal and effectual. The difference between being driven by passion and coming to profit versus being driven by profit and may or may not have passion involved, right? Because the journalist is asking questions purely using business terms and business jargon. But you will see Damon John is answering like an expert entrepreneur. And what is an expert entrepreneur good at? They are good at bringing this life, whatever they care about personally, together, but also they are practical enough to know how to make it into profit, right? So you have to also be able to deliver and develop a kind of an financial sustainability in your venture. So I'm going to show you this, and as you watch the video, and if necessary, we can watch it twice if you like, which is just notice the way Scott Gerber is asking the questions and the way Damon John is responding to the questions. Also, for a moment, you're all my students, see if you can recognize the 5 principles of effectuation. Okay? So let me play it. The first time, let's just play it, but keep this in mind. Notice the difference between Scott and Damon. And then whenever Damon speaks, see if you can hear the principles. So you have 2 assignments, okay? All right, here we go. Yeah?
Do we have the sound?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. We'll try it in a second. If it doesn't, we'll come back.
Yeah, well, look,
Let's talk about food when you first got started. You sort of saw something that most people didn't see, a market that was sort of unseen and not really heard about other than amongst you and your peers. What made you say there's a market here?
At that age, that was the only market to me. You see, it was a segment of people who just really love this music called hip hop, and that I lived in, everything else hip hop. So I don't think I saw an opportunity that other people didn't see. I saw, why doesn't anybody know about my love, my passion?
And so when you look at the various items you tried different items of clothing, what ultimately gave you that core value, that core belief that said, this isn't just a couple of t-shirts or a couple of hats or a couple of specific apparel items. This is a brand that's got longevity. This is not just some one-off success.
Well, it kept growing. Initially started with hats, but I was fortunate enough to have 3 other partners who I did not start just by myself. I had 3 other partners, and they came over there and they started saying, man, we can make this bigger. We can make this bigger. And most fashion houses or designers were one person. It was 4 of us at any given time in different places.
When do you feel that you owned your market enough to own that culture, in your opinion?
Organic growth, I would say more like life support, right? Because from 1989 to 92, I closed food 3 times because I ran out of cash.
What were the reasons for running out of cash? Was it just supply and demand? Was it just investing in change?
It was trying to cut patterns. It was selling a couple shirts here and then having to actually eat and feed myself. So I had to use the money to buy a couple of wing dinners or something like that. The cash wasn't a lot. Maybe it was $2,000. But as it grew, I realized that we owned the market right around 2000, which was about 11 years later.
And what was that moment? Was that aha? Was it just plain penetration of the products in the space, or was it just a feeling?
That aha moment was, $350 million in sales, 50 international stores, everybody calling leaders such as Mandela and Prince and everybody else of that nature, and people just wanting more and more, and they couldn't get enough of it.
As you work today as an advisor in businesses yourself, obviously now having a lot of different businesses outside even maybe your core disciplines as you're used to, what advice do you give them when you're trying to figure out how they can target new markets or find new opportunities? What are you telling them to keep their eyes open for or to be aware of as they begin to see where their products and businesses can go?
Well, there's several steps. So first of all, as I said, you always have to go make a sale. Don't have analysis paralysis and go out there and guess the whole world's going to be, great. You're going to sell your product. Go out there and actually physically make a sale. Not to grandma who loves you, because she's going to buy the stuff anyway, right? Sell it to an absolute stranger, number 1. Number 2 is start to be aware of the other markets that are tapping into your goods. That's really why Fubu was founded, because Tim Lennon made a comment, and we don't saw most of the drug dealers when they didn't realize that basically 80% of their revenue was coming from these inner city kids who were not hiking, they weren't climbing, they weren't construction workers. So they didn't adopt that market. I went home and I created another brand that did pay attention to that market. Always understand where your market is, who your market is. When I first launched Fubu, Seattle, Washington, and Japan were the first places that bought it. It was the guys who loved grunge, and it was the Japanese kids who loved hip hop. And I supported those kids. So you always have to just understand who is your customer, and don't shy away, because you only have this tunnel vision of who you think your customer is.
Okay, that was a lot, and it was quick. would anybody like to make a comment on the video? Things that you heard or things that you did not hear, so I can elaborate. So you saw him saying, right? How did you know that there was a huge opportunity? And Damon says, no, I just loved this music. And I said, why doesn't everybody know about my passion, my love? So he did not know there was a big opportunity. He also talked about a lot of fashion companies have only one founder, the designer, right? The artist. He says, we had 4 people. And that made a big difference. He talked about partnerships. He talked about affordable loss and failure, right? That in the early stage, it took 11 years for the success. So you were asking me earlier, Franco, how long does it take? We have good data on it that most successful companies, anywhere between 6 to 11 years is what it takes. It does not happen. You know, don't believe all the news you hear about Silicon Valley. Even in Silicon Valley, it takes a long time, and I can show you stories of that as well. So it takes a while, and so how do you survive during that? You can only invest what you can afford to lose. And then he talked about, don't think you know where your market is, right? You have to actually understand who your customer is. And his customers, to his real surprise, were not in New York, right, where he lived. It was in Seattle and in Japan. And now you say, what do you do with them? And you start, he says, I supported them. So think about this thing. I support my customers, right? I don't target them, which is how we teach. So it's a very different way of thinking about it. And then in terms of advice, he says, don't sit and imagine your market. Go out and make a sale. A real sale as quickly as possible. So you can see the principles of effectuation in that. So at this moment, I want to stop. If there are a couple of questions from the audience based on my presentation, I want to take them, just a couple. If there are 20 questions, I will stop at around 2, because I want us to hear from the real entrepreneurs in this room. So maybe just 1 or 2 questions, and then we invite the guest entrepreneurs. All right? So if there is 1 or 2 questions, I am happy to take the question. Yes.
Crazy quest or crazy...
Can you
Sorry, yeah.
ask again? Yeah.
Could you please explain a little bit further the concept of crazy quilt? Yeah. Where, like you mentioned at the beginning, for finding a partner, for instance.
Yes.
But any other applications, what do you mean, or what are the things done in that phase?
Excellent question. And in fact, the last 7 years, my research has been looking inside that box, inside Crazy Quilt, and how that happens. So let me explain a simple way to think about it, right? So let's say you have an idea. This is your idea. You're going to make this. But remember, this does not exist, right? This is just in your head. You're going to make it. You're going to go talk to people. And when you talk to people, let's say a potential customer, what happens is that customer is going to tell you something. They're going to say, most customers are not going to say, no, I don't want it, or yes, I want it. They're going to say, well, you know, maybe, if it is cheap, if the color is different, you know, I don't think the shape is working for me. So you get all this feedback, right? And you ask yourself, what do you do with that? So here's a customer who's saying, you know, or as I said, I made you CTO earlier. I asked him, will you come build my technology? And he said, you know, and so you're going to get this kind of information, right? So the Crazy Quilt is about how you respond to people's reactions to you. So you can go back to the 2x2, the prediction and control. You can say, okay, I want to make this, but here is my customer who's saying, you know, you need to change the color or you need to change the shape. So I can either say, oh, no, I am a visionary. This is my baby, right? I am going to persist in what I do. Thank you very much, but clearly you're not my customer, right? So that is one reaction you can have. Another reaction you can hear is, oh, customer wants to change the color and the shape, so let me change the color and shape. So you become adaptive, right? Or you can say, oh, this customer wants a different color and a different shape. So let me talk to this customer and that customer and that customer. And everyone is giving me different things. I put it all in a spreadsheet and I start running some optimization algorithms and I decide what I should do. That is causal, right? The effectual way is to go back to the customer and say, why do you want to change the color? What are you willing to do to change the color with me? The idea is, if that person says, I need to change the color because, you can say, and then you ask, what would it take for you to come build the dream color for you? And then if that person says, you know what, yeah, I am professor of production engineering. I can have 3 PhDs actually build a prototype for you. Then you take him seriously. Then you say, okay, then it doesn't, you're not adapting. Now you're working with him, and he is going to put his PhD student to help you change the color and shape of it. Then you go that way, right? So the crazy quilt is all about these interactions and what happens in this interaction. And you can see, you can use this over and over and over again. So that's going a little bit deeper into the crazy quilt. But you can see you can use it to build product. You can use it to build a team. You can use it if you're dealing with the government and you need to convince them to change a law. So one of our colleagues who's not here today, she will come, she studies how laws are, how entrepreneurs influence the institutions in the society. So you can think about, so you are interested in the environment and you probably have to tackle customers, investors, technologists, and you also have to deal with the university probably and with the government, right? And you can use it in each of those places, okay? And as I said, if you need to know more, then you need to come take my class. So this is just, we can do only so much given the time. Any other questions? All right, maybe we can invite the entrepreneurs. Yes.